Isn't creationism something that we thankfully don't have to worry about anymore? Indeed, creationism has declined in the public discourse. If you look at Google Ngram, it searches keywords in books. If we start in 1970, when creationism really kind of came on the scene, there are definite peaks and valleys of interest, and interest slows as you get closer to the present day. Now, books take time to write and get published, and so there's always a little bit of a lag, naturally. So we can see a peak occurs in the discussion of creationism a few years after two critical legal decisions, the 1980 cases McLean versus Arkansas and Edwards versus Aguillard. And another peak is right after the 2005 intelligent design trial, Kitzmiller versus Dover, which is something my organization had a few things to do with. After that, while you're at it, keep an eye out for Robert Pennock, who's here. He was the expert witness for us in Kitzmiller as a philosopher of science, and thank him for his service, okay? And after that, the coverage of creationism has declined. Another way of looking at the amount of public interest in creationism is through Google Trends, which doesn't start quite as early, but if you start at 2004, which is where they began, there's a peak at the Dover trial, and also in 2008. And I thought, what went on in 2008? Well, there was an article that came out in Wired about whether Sarah Palin was a creationist or not. And everybody, what's creationism? Everybody went. And then there was another peak in 2014 when Bill Nye debated creationist Ken Ham. Hi, Bill. But things look pretty good for our side thereafter. I mean, what we really want creationism to flatline, don't we? This is looking really good there. But even if we're not seeing much public discussion of creationism in the news, it definitely has not gone away in the United States. There are 13 major creationist museums listed in Wikipedia, and check them out, follow the links. Geographically, they're found everywhere from New York to California. Most of them are small, but some of them are multi-million-dollar operations. The Glendive, Montana Museum opened in 2009, and the Glendive Museum takes a very traditional young earth creationist point of view. Everything was created at one time in essentially its present day form, so humans and dinosaurs together, the classic. And the earth is about 10,000 years old rather than billions of years old. But this is not some storefront. It has the second largest collection of dinosaur fossils in Montana, which is saying a lot because Montana's got a lot of dinosaur fossils. It also has a lot of dinosaur museums. According to the Tourist Bureau, there are 14 dinosaur museums in Montana, and the Glendive Museum is second in size only to the Museum of the Rockies, which is a real thing. And judging from the photographs I could find online, I haven't been to this particular one. Life is short. It's pretty well done. The largest creation museum in the country, of course, is Answers in Genesis Creation Museum in northern Kentucky. It opened in 2007 with an exhibit area of 60,000 square feet, and they seem to be doing pretty well. AIG also has another impressive creationist destination, the Ark Encounter. It opened in 2016. Claims 1 million attendees a year, which is exaggerated. But it's really big. You can see the human beings there next to the Ark. The thing is 510 feet long, and it is astonishing in many respects. In 2002, Answers in Genesis bought the Toyota headquarters in northern Kentucky to use for offices and for a planned school that they want to open. So they must be getting a lot of donations. The Toyota headquarters is 2,005 square feet, 205,000 square feet, pardon me, and cost $31 million. The most recent creationist museum is in Dallas, where the Institute for Creation Research opened their museum in September 2019, not that long ago. It's about 30,000 square feet, smaller than the AIG Museum, but still substantial. And like the AIG Museum, the ICR paid cash in building it. Now, there are not very many attempts to pass legislation to require the teaching of creationism. Yet as early as 2021, a bill was proposed in Arkansas that would permit teachers to teach creationism. Now, the reason why creationism isn't taught and evolution is because of a series of legal decisions over the last century. In literally every single creationism versus evolution case, not 95% of them, not 99% of them, but 100% of them, creationism has lost. So why have the courts been so harsh on creationism? Because of the First Amendment. The core of the First Amendment religion section is the Establishment and Free Exercise clauses. Taken together, they require the government to be neutral toward religion, neither promoting nor inhibiting religion, favoring one religion over another, favoring religion over non-religion. Unfortunately, courts have become more conservative over the last 20 years, and the idea of government neutrality towards religion has been weakening. The point of my talk today is that this may have a negative effect on science teaching. To understand why, we need to look more closely at the Establishment Clause. Since 1971, Establishment Clause cases have been decided based on Lemon versus Kurtzman. Lemon concerned whether states could use tax money to pay teachers, buy supplies, purchase textbooks, and so forth for private religious schools as well as, obviously, public schools. And Justice Brennan decided that they couldn't, based on a three-part test that he had devised. Does the practice or law have a religious purpose? Does the law has the effect of promoting or denigrating religion? Does it cause an undue entanglement with religion? Does the government have to involve itself too closely with religion should this bill or policy be passed? The justices decided in Lemon that courts would have to monitor schools too closely over things like, are teachers who are being paid by the state really teaching only secular topics, or are they teaching religious topics? That's just too much fussing. It's too much entanglement. In other words, the entanglement clause is really important. And most cases that have been judged under the Lemon test focus on entanglement, as purpose is often difficult to discern, and often the effect of the law is not predictable. Conservatives on the court have been especially harsh about Lemon, as Scalia here, and Happy Halloween, like some ghoul in a late-night horror movie that repeatedly sits up in its grave and shuffles abroad after being repeatedly killed and buried. Lemon stalks our Establishment Clause jurisprudence once again. Similarly, Justice Gorsuch referred to Lemon as a dog's breakfast. I had to look that one up. It's a Britishism, referring to just sort of looking through the refrigerator and shelves and just putting together whatever mess you have to feed the dog. So a dog's breakfast is a mess. And Thomas has also called for the abandonment of Lemon on several occasions. But you know, even if lawyers are not wringing wet about Lemon, the one kind of civil liberties case where Lemon is absolutely on point, absolutely perfect, is creationism and evolution cases. With creation and evolution cases, all the cases after Lemon have cited Lemon versus Kurtzman as precedent, and in every single one of these cases, it is clear that there is a religious purpose, there is a religious effect, and in most cases, there's entanglement. It's like Lemon was written for creationism and evolution cases. Those of us who have been concerned about the creationism and evolution controversy have been very worried about the demise of Lemon for just this reason. We have depended upon it. And as I have said on many, many occasions, the courts do not protect us against bad science in schools. They can only protect us against the advocacy of religion. Worrying over whether they would find a case, and it looks like they did. Last year, in June of 2022, the Supreme Court issued a decision in Kennedy versus Bremerton. You doubtless heard about this case. This is the one about the praying football coach kneeling on the 50-yard line. Yeah. Joseph Kennedy was an assistant football coach at Bremerton High School, which is near Seattle in Washington State. His day job was as a manager for the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. Now, the assistant football coach job is a part-time one, and seasonal from spring training through summer and fall, and it pays about $5,000 a year. This was not his livelihood, first of all. In an op-ed for Fox News, he wrote, quote, "Before I coached my first game in 2008, I made a commitment to God that I would give thanks after each game, win or lose, for the opportunity to be a football coach and for my players." He would pray with the students in the locker room before a game, and after the game, he would pray at the 50-yard line because he had promised God he would. He would invite students from his team and even the opposing team and coach to pray with him. In 2015, a coach that he had invited to pray with the team just happened to mention to the Bremerton High School principal, "I think it's pretty cool the way you let Coach Joe pray on the 50-yard line." This was news to the principal. And so the athletic director investigated, and they found, rather to their dismay, that Kennedy had been praying in the locker room and kneeling on the 50-yard line after games for years. Before the game on September 11, 2015, the athletic director told him he shouldn't be conducting prayers with players, but he did anyway. And in fact, even tweeted, "I think I might have been fired from my job." That tells you more about Coach Joe. The next month, October 14, and Kennedy was approached by a legal organization from Texas called the First Liberties Organization, who volunteered to represent him. In the next month, in October, Kennedy's First Liberties Institute lawyer wrote the district informing them that Coach Joe was going to resume praying on the 50-yard line at the homecoming game 2 days later. That October 16 game was where things really fell apart. The arrow shows Kennedy in the blue jacket there, surrounded by students, and you see the press and the parents and audience in back. He had made a number of media appearances before the game, promising to pray at the 50-yard line, and the public turned out. TV cameras recorded the public streaming onto the field on their way to the 50-yard line, breaking down fences and even knocking over some student band members. Poor kids. Again, the district warned him to stop praying and again offered an accommodation. You can pray by yourself. You can pray away from the students. You can pray after your post-game duties are over. You can have a personal private prayer. That's fine, no problem. When, again, after the next game, he again caused a ruckus on the 50-yard line, the district suspended him with pay. That fall, Kennedy got a negative evaluation from the athletic director for not carrying out his duties after the game. He was generally very busy with media and the public, not following district policy, and so on, and recommended he not be hired for the next year. Kennedy sued on free speech and free exercise grounds. The school district replied, citing Establishment Clause responsibilities of keeping students free from religious coercion, using Lemon versus Kurtzman, of course. That was the standard for the interpretation of Establishment Clause cases. The district and appeals courts agreed with agreed with the Bremerton district. And finally, the case, as often occurs a couple of years later, made its way to the Supreme Court, and oral arguments were heard on April 25, 2022. Now, the oral arguments were frustrating to listen to. It was clear that there were many discrepancies between the stories being told by the plaintiff and by the defense. And the 6-3 decision that came down on June 27, a couple months later, from Gorsuch, read like it referred to a different case. Sotomayor's dissent makes clear how the majority opinion ignores the factual record. Gorsuch says that Kennedy's prayers were private, personal, and quiet, whereas they were none of those. He focuses on the 3 games in the fall of 2015, ignoring the 7-year history of prayer in the field and in locker rooms during coaching time. He also ignored Kennedy's insistence on public rather than private prayer where students could see and join him. Gorsuch also ignored that some students felt coerced to participate to get playing time. It is notable that after Coach Joe was suspended, the students didn't continue praying on their own. Gorsuch also ignores the chaos that Kennedy's insistence on public prayer caused during those games. Sotomayor even included 2 photographs in her dissent. Now, this is almost unheard of in a Supreme Court decision. They just don't use visual aids. This is just not something that you see. But as interesting as the details of this case are for general church and state separation, I want to focus on another component to Kennedy versus Bremerton, which is the overturning of Lemon versus Kurtzman. As I mentioned, the late Justices Scalia and also Gorsuch, Thomas, Kavanaugh, and other conservative justices have been gunning for Lemon for a long time. And the Kennedy case, the facts of which were misstated by Gorsuch, was the opportunity they took to finally nail down its coffin lid. As Sotomayor points out, overturning Lemon puts decades of precedents in jeopardy, including, of course, the long list of creationism and evolution cases, all of which were perfectly decided using Lemon. In fact, the judge in Kitzmiller versus Dover, Judge John Jones III, after the Kennedy versus Bremerton decision came out, wrote a newspaper, an op-ed piece saying that he thought that striking down Lemon was the wrong decision, that Lemon was a perfectly good way to interpret the Establishment Clause, and in fact, he had used it in Kitzmiller versus Dover. Go Judge Jones. Well, if not Lemon, what does the court suggest be used to decide whether a policy or law violates the Establishment Clause? And Eddie's getting heartburn here, you know that. I only have 25 minutes, there's a lot more details, so buttonhole Eddie, he can tell you a whole lot about Kennedy, because Eddie and I were on the board of Americans United for Separation of Church and State when all this was going on. What the Supreme Court wants to substitute for Lemon is something they call history and tradition. This is part of the court's current enthusiasm for originalism in its varieties, hearkening back to we should interpret laws and policies and so forth as how would the founding fathers have interpreted this, what were their thoughts about this issue? Well, there were no public schools in the 1700s. And I assure you, there was no alternative to biblical creationism back in the 1700s either. Evolution hadn't been developed as a scientific explanation. And so the founding fathers would not have had any opinion whatsoever about whether evolution should be taught in schools. History and tradition strikes me as a particularly slippery criterion on which to base Establishment Clause jurisprudence across the board, but definitely in terms of creationism and evolution cases. History and tradition is ripe for cherry picking, and history is ripe as a ripe cherry tree in that regard. It can be used to support quite a large number of conclusions, which means that the facts of a given case are going to be extraordinarily important. And as we have seen in Kennedy versus Bremerton, Gorsuch's decision, the facts can differ quite greatly in a decision from what they actually were. The First Liberty Institute lawyer Matt Krause, commenting on a bill to put the 10 Commandments in Texas schools, said, "The law has undergone a massive shift. It's not too much to say that the Kennedy case for religious liberty was much like the Dobbs case was for the pro-life movement." So what happens now? The precedent that has kept creationism in all its forms out of schools has been struck down. A main strategy in Kitzmiller was for us to tie intelligent design to traditional creationism. And all of our expert witnesses, including Rob obviously, did this to some degree or another. We tied intelligent design to creationism, and we win. Full stop. Courts had ruled over and over that creationism was religious advocacy. Teaching creationism as science was an Establishment Clause violation as determined by application of the Lemon test, excuse me. Now, the current anti-evolutionary approach for legislation is not so much to say, well, though, who knows about the future? By and large, it hasn't been up until now. Teach creation science, teach intelligent design. That has not been the approach they've taken. They've taken the approach of teach evolution as invalid science or questionable science or controversial science, requiring special treatment, such as teaching the strengths and weaknesses of evolution, or we should be fair and teach more than one scientific point of view and critical thinking and so forth. There hasn't been a legal decision as to whether these more recent decisions are constitutional. Our plan had been all along is that should such a case develop, we would then go over the history of the creationist movement and show how the evidence against evolution school, which is extant, it was really just a modified form of creationism. Therefore, this was really creationism. Therefore, it violates the Establishment Clause, and we win again. But that was back when Lemon was still precedent, and it is no more. The purpose, effect, and entanglement clauses, which worked so perfectly with creationism, evolution jurisprudence, can no longer be cited in these cases. Now, remember that Arkansas law that I mentioned that was from 1921? It would have allowed creationism to be taught. The sponsor of the bill, Mrs. Bentley, was reminded that the federal courts, including McLean versus Arkansas, have repeatedly held that teaching creationism in the public schools is unconstitutional. In response, Bentley, we got ahead of ourselves here. In response, Bentley expressed the hope that with changes in the Supreme Court, her bill might ultimately survive constitutional scrutiny. This was a year before Kennedy. This was 2021, Kennedy was 22. Now it is the year after Kennedy. So what has happened on the legislative front? Well, it's been busy. Fortunately, none of these passed. The ones marked with an asterisk are anti-evolution or potential anti-evolution bills. Montana and Texas bills say teachers must teach only facts in science classes, not theories. We can go on and on about fact versus theories, can't we not? And Texas, of course, adds the ever-beloved strengths and weaknesses of evolution, naturally. I'll skip the Minnesota bill bid because the bill is just weird. There are other questions. The question mark ones on this slide are the controversial issues bills that constrain teachers when teaching controversial issues. Many of the states that have these controversial issues bills, and there are many of them, define a controversial as one that has appeared in the platform of a political party. Now, that is significant because even though the Republican Party doesn't have a platform now, it's Trumpism all the time. In the past, the Republican Party, nationally and state parties, have included evolution and climate science as controversial issues. What to do about legislation like this? Well, don't let it get out of the committee. The West Virginia bill permitting the teaching of intelligent design passed the state Senate 26-3. That's a lot of senators voting for a terrible bill. Fortunately, it died in the House committee and never got to the House floor, because if it had gotten to the House floor, like when it got to the Senate floor, it's very hard to vote against these bills. If you are a politician in the United States, you are ill-served by coming across as being anti-religious. These bills are bad science. They're not, this is bad educational policy. It's not anti-religious, it's just crappy science. They shouldn't be passed. But that's not how they are interpreted. Legislation is not the only concern. Another concern is the individual teacher and what actually gets taught when the classroom door is shut. And I can easily envision a teacher saying, well, the standards say I have to teach you evolution, but you don't have to believe it. And besides that, I have evidence here that Genesis is really right. Genesis really happened. Let me teach you some creation science. And if creationism comes into the classroom, either through legislation or through teachers freelancing, we can't use Lemon to stop it. We have to use history and tradition. And in my opinion, this bodes ill for evolution education. It is true that creationism is not in the headlines much, but it has a reservoir of popularity that should not be underestimated. Creation science and intelligent design proponents may well gear up to exploit the tendencies for this Supreme Court to privilege free exercise over establishment clauses in church and state cases. So stay tuned. I'm really this cheerful person, but I give these really depressive talks. And my former National Center for Science Education colleagues may well have their hands full yet again. Thank you.